The morning sun barely penetrated the thick desert haze as the convoy of dark vehicles rolled to a halt outside the main barracks of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group compound in Virginia Beach. For the seasoned operators inside, it was just another Monday. For the 50 new candidates spilling out of the trucks, it was the first day of hell. Among them, a figure moved with a quiet confidence that immediately drew eyes. She was shorter than most, her frame lean but coiled with the tension of a sprinter in the blocks. Her name was Lieutenant Jordan Chase, and she was about to step into a world that, until recently, had been legally closed to women. As the candidates formed up, the catcalls started. They weren't loud enough to draw the attention of the instructors, but they were pointed, sharp, and designed to cut. "Hey, sweetheart, did you lose your way to the admin corps?" one burly infantryman muttered. Another, a tall master-at-arms with a neck the size of a tree trunk, sneered, "Don't cry when you fall back on the swim. We don't have time to carry your pack." Jordan stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her jaw set like granite. She had expected this. She had trained for this. The physical pain of Bud/S was a given. The mental gauntlet of proving she belonged was the real test. The initial screenings were brutal. The instructors, grizzled veterans of countless deployments, showed no favoritism. If anything, they were harder on her. During the first physical screening test, she maxed out her push-ups and sit-ups, her form flawless. On the run, she stayed in the middle of the pack, pacing herself, ignoring the burning in her lungs. But it was during the swim that things changed. The tree-necked master-at-arms, a man named Kowalski, who had been a competitive swimmer in college, tried to box her out in the pool, cutting her off during a timed lap. Jordan didn't flinch. She ducked under him, exploded forward, and touched the wall a full 3 seconds ahead of him. When she pulled off her goggles, she caught the eye of one of the lead instructors, a senior chief with eyes that looked like they had seen the devil himself. He gave her the slightest nod. It was the only approval she would get for a long time. Weeks turned into months. Hell Week arrived with its signature cocktail of sleep deprivation, freezing cold surf, and constant, bone-crushing labor. Jordan's boat crew, made up of 8 men, was struggling. They were exhausted, hypothermic, and their boat, a heavy inflatable, kept veering off course. The team leader, a hothead from Texas, was yelling incoherently. Jordan, shivering violently, recognized the symptoms of group panic. Without waiting for permission, she started calling out a cadence. Her voice was hoarse, but it cut through the fog. "Stroke! Stroke! Pull together! Keep your eyes on the back of the head in front of you!" The crew, desperate for any direction, instinctively followed her rhythm. The boat straightened out. They made it to the checkpoint. That night, huddled in a wet shelter, one of the guys, a quiet kid from Ohio named Murphy, passed her half of his protein bar. It was a small gesture, a crack in the wall of hostility. She took it, nodded, and ate it in silence. It was the first time they didn't see her as a woman. They saw her as a crewmate who had just saved them from a fail. Graduation from BUD/S was a monumental achievement, but Jordan knew it was just a ticket to the next fight. She had her eyes on the ultimate prize, the Scout Sniper course. Her performance on the range during training had been noticed. While other candidates struggled with windage and elevation, Jordan seemed to have an almost supernatural sense of the bullet's path. The senior chief who had nodded at her during the swim, a man named Donovan, pulled her aside one day. "You have a gift, Chase," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But the sniper course is a different beast. It's not about muscle, it's about mind. It's about patience, and you'll be the first woman to ever set foot in that course. They will eat you alive." Jordan looked him straight in the eye. "Let them try. Senior Chief." The Scout Sniper course was a crucible of a different kind. It was less about physical endurance and more about mental fortitude. The candidates spent days and nights in the field, learning to stalk targets, calculate wind speeds by the way grass bent, and remain invisible for hours on end. The instructors were legendary shooters, men with triple-digit confirmed kills who viewed the world through the crosshairs of a scope. They were skeptical of Jordan, but they were also professional. They didn't care about gender, they cared about results. During the stalks, Jordan excelled. Her small frame allowed her to hide in depressions that the larger men couldn't fit into. She could slide through underbrush without disturbing a single leaf. She moved like smoke. During the land navigation courses, she never got lost. She had a photographic memory for terrain. It was during the final field exercise that the narrative shifted. The class was split into teams for a complex target identification drill. They had to observe a mock enemy compound from a ridge nearly a mile away, identifying specific personnel and vehicles. Jordan was behind the scope, her eye glued to the lens for 6 straight hours. She spotted details the spotter next to her missed: a scar on a target's face, a specific patch on a uniform. Her spotter, a massive SEAL from Texas named Boone, who had been one of her loudest detractors on day 1, looked at her with new respect. "How the hell did you see that?" he whispered. "I pay attention," she replied, not moving her eye from the scope. That night, as they exfiltrated the area, Boone tripped a pressure plate. It was a training simulator, but the bang was deafening. In the chaos, the instructor declared Boone dead. Jordan, now alone with a simulated casualty, had to complete the mission and extract. She dragged Boone's 220-pound frame nearly 2 kilometers back to the extraction point, stopping only to re-engage the enemy. When she finally made it, her hands were raw and bleeding. The head instructor walked up to her, looked at the blood on her hands, then at the exhausted, dead Boone on the ground. He didn't say a word. He just wrote something in his notebook and walked away. 2 days later, Jordan was pinned with the Scout Sniper crest. She was now officially one of the most lethal weapons in the U.S. military arsenal. Her first deployment as a fully fledged SEAL sniper was to the volatile border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the intelligence community had picked up chatter about a high-value terrorist cell leader, a man known as the Mullah, who was moving through the mountain villages. Jordan's team was tasked with setting up observation posts, OPs, to track his movements and, if the opportunity arose, take the shot. The terrain was brutal. Jagged peaks that scraped the bellies of low-flying clouds, freezing nights and scorching days. They would hump 80-pound packs up sheer cliffs, establish an OP that was little more than a crevice in the rock, and lie there for days without moving. On the 3rd week of the deployment, they got a lead. The mullah was supposed to meet with a logistics coordinator in a small, isolated village. Jordan's team set up on a ridgeline overlooking the village, 1,200 meters out. It was a long shot, but within her capability. But they waited. For 2 days, nothing moved except the goats and the wind. On the 3rd day, the target appeared. He was flanked by 4 guards, walking towards a mud brick compound. Jordan had him in her scope. The crosshairs settled on his chest. She breathed in, breathed out, and held. The safety was off. Her trigger finger began to apply pressure. Then, just as she was about to fire, a child ran out of a doorway and stood directly in front of the target, laughing and playing. The child was blocking the shot. Jordan didn't hesitate. She eased her finger off the trigger. "Target denied," she whispered over the radio. "Obstruction, non-combatant." Her spotter, Kowalski, the same man who had mocked her in the pool, looked at her in disbelief. "Take the shot! He'll move!" he hissed. "No," Jordan said, her voice like iron. "I will not risk a child. We wait." The moment passed. The child moved, but the target had entered the compound, disappearing under a covered walkway. They had lost the window. Back at the Forward Operating Base, FOB, the mission was debriefed. The commanding officer was furious they had missed the shot. He questioned Jordan's judgment. "In a combat zone, you have to make split-second decisions," he barked. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied calmly. "And my decision was that no target is worth the life of an innocent child. We will get another chance." The room fell silent. The older operators, the ones who had seen the worst of war, looked at her with a new, profound respect. They knew she was right. That chance came sooner than expected. The botched opportunity in the village forced the mullah to move his operation. He fled deeper into the mountains, towards a series of caves that had been used by militants for decades. Jordan's team, along with a contingent of Army Rangers, was tasked with pursuing him. The chase led them up to an altitude of nearly 10,000 feet, where the air was thin and every step was a battle against exhaustion. They moved at night, using night vision goggles, their faces painted black, their steps silent on the rocky terrain. They located the cave complex at dawn. It was a natural fortress with multiple entrances overlooking a sheer drop. A direct assault would be suicide. Jordan and her spotter Boone, who had recovered from his simulated death and was now her biggest supporter, found a spot on a neighboring peak. The distance to the main cave entrance was a staggering 1,550 meters. The wind was gusting unpredictably, swirling up from the valley below. The shot was nearly impossible. Jordan set up her .300 Winchester Magnum, her precision weapon. She adjusted for altitude, for temperature, for the spin of the earth. She watched the cave entrance for hours, counting the guards, memorizing their patrol patterns. Then, just as the sun began to set, casting long, confusing shadows across the valley floor, the mullah stepped out. He was flanked by 2 guards, but for a split second, he was visible. Jordan's world narrowed to the space between her scope and that target. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow down. She factored in the wind, the angle, the distance. The shot was a thing of pure mathematics, a physics problem with a human cost. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley like thunder. Then a second and a half later, the target crumpled. One guard looked around in confusion. The other dragged the body back inside. The shot was perfect. "Target down. Confirmed," Boone whispered, his voice trembling with adrenaline. On the FOB, the intelligence community scrambled to verify the kill. Over the next 48 hours, signals intelligence and human sources confirmed it. The mullah was dead. It was Jordan's 300th confirmed kill, a number that put her in the record books, surpassing even the legendary Chris Kyle's official count. She was a ghost, a legend in the making, and the enemy began to whisper of a shaitan, devil, who haunted the mountains, a marksman who never missed. But legends are rarely celebrated by everyone. When the team rotated back to the States, the news of Jordan's record should have been a public relations goldmine for the Navy. But the old guard resisted. During a mandatory after-action review at the Pentagon, a senior officer, a man who had publicly opposed women in combat roles, tried to diminish her accomplishment. He suggested that the kill count was inflated, that spotter reports in the mountains were unreliable, that perhaps the credit should be shared. It was a veiled attempt to strip her of her achievement. The meeting was tense. Jordan sat in her dress uniform, her silver trident pinned to her chest, her face a mask of stoicism. The officer, a captain with rows of ribbons, droned on about verification protocols and chain of command credit. Jordan remained silent, letting him talk. When he finally finished, he looked at her, expecting a challenge. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "Captain," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I have prepared a dossier. It contains after-action video from every engagement, drone footage corroborating each shot, and signals intelligence timestamps that match my spotter's logs. There are 309 separate files. You are welcome to review each one." She slid the tablet across the table. The room was dead silent. The captain stared at the tablet, his face reddening. He hadn't expected proof. He had expected a fight. A he-said-she-said argument he could bury in paperwork. But Jordan had come prepared. She had known this day would come. The chief of naval operations, a 4-star admiral who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. He walked over, picked up the tablet, and scrolled through a few files. He looked at Jordan, and then at the captain. "I think that concludes this review," the admiral said. "Lieutenant Chase, congratulations on your service. The Navy is proud of you." The captain was dismissed. The record stood. Jordan's story should have ended there, with the quiet vindication of a warrior. But the nature of special operations is secrecy, and the nature of bureaucracy is leaky. Someone in that room, angry at the admiral's decision, leaked a sanitized but inflammatory version of the story to a tabloid news outlet. The headline was designed to provoke, "Women don't belong in the SEALs." The new recruit mocked. Then the female marksman displayed her 300 verified kills. The article was a hatchet job, focusing on the initial resistance she faced and portraying her as a divisive figure who had humiliated her male colleagues. It omitted the context of her heroism, her ethical decision to spare a child, and the grueling years of sacrifice. It was designed to sell papers by igniting a culture war. The fallout was immediate and vicious. Social media exploded. Half the country hailed her as a hero. The other half called her a government plant, a liar, a publicity stunt. Death threats, which had been a low hum in the background, became a roaring flood. They came from domestic extremists who resented her success and from foreign jihadis who now had a face and a name to attach to the mountain legend. The Navy, worried about operational security and her personal safety, confined her to base. She went from roaming free in the mountains of Afghanistan to being a prisoner in her own country. And the lowest point came when she was called to testify in a congressional hearing about the role of women in special operations. It was a circus. Politicians used her as a prop, grandstanding for the cameras. On the way into the hearing room, a overzealous security guard, either acting on his own prejudices or following a misunderstood order, actually tried to handcuff her. It was a moment of utter humiliation. Here was a woman who had killed 309 enemies of the state, who had dragged wounded men to safety, who had turned down a shot to save a child, and she was being treated like a criminal in the halls of her own government. The cameras flashed. The moment was captured. For a split second, the stoic mask cracked, and the world saw the exhaustion and pain in her eyes. Just as the guard was roughly pulling her wrists together, a booming voice echoed down the marble corridor. "Stand down!" Every person in the hallway froze. It was Admiral Crawford, the same 4-star admiral from the Pentagon briefing. He was not a man to be trifled with. He walked up to the guard, his face a mask of cold fury. "You will uncuff her immediately," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This officer has bled more for this country than you ever will. If I ever see anything like this again, I will have your badge and your pension. Do I make myself clear?" The guard, trembling, fumbled with the keys. Admiral Crawford turned to Jordan, and for the first time in months, someone in authority looked at her, not as a political symbol, but as a person. "I apologize for this, Lieutenant. It will not happen again. Now let's go set the record straight." He walked her into the hearing room, in his presence a shield against the vultures. In the years that followed, Lieutenant Jordan Chase retired from active duty. She didn't do it because she was broken, but because her work was done. She had proven a point that shouldn't have needed proving, that courage, skill, and honor have no gender. She transitioned to a training role, teaching the next generation of snipers, both men and women, the art of the stalk and the weight of the trigger. She often told them the story of the child in the village. "Being a sniper isn't about how many people you kill," she would say, her voice echoing in the quiet classroom. "It's about the lives you have the power to take, and the wisdom to know when not to. The moment you lose that wisdom, you lose your humanity. And without your humanity, you're just a murderer with a nice rifle. She bought a small piece of land in the mountains of Montana, a place where the wind howled and the silence was complete. It reminded her of Afghanistan, but without the fear. She kept a single photograph on her mantle. It wasn't of a medal ceremony or a handshake with an admiral. It was a grainy, long-range photo taken by a drone. In it, a small child is laughing, running out of a doorway, while in the background, a man with a gun stands frozen in the shadows. It was the shot she didn't take. It was her greatest trophy, the proof that even in the heart of darkness, she had kept the light. And in the quiet of the mountains, surrounded by the peace she had helped to buy, Lieutenant Jordan Chase finally found the one thing her entire career had been missing: home.